Okay. So I think that the way I'm gonna, this isn't it. Oh, I have to
Okay.
like,
Okay. This is not the actual beginning.
no,
This is our preamble for when we listen later, we'll remember.
not,
Don't include this.
don't include this.
Okay.
I think that I'm going to, no, okay. I'll just start. I don't know how this is gonna go, Sasha. Well, let's just start. Okay, ready?
Okay. Just before you start, and yes, we always try to start by framing something
Yeah.
and then like talking about it. I think if it works for you to tell your story, to frame it and then
I was
talk about
thinking,
it,
you think that's okay?
I think that's okay because
Okay, I'm gonna
it's an
do it that way.
interesting story and it I think clarifies what we're saying, what you're
Okay,
talking
that's
about.
what I'm gonna do then. And then
Anyway,
we're
I just
gonna
gave you
go.
permission to do
Thank you
things you
very
didn't need
much.
my permission for, but
I
just
wanted your permission and you sensed it,
okay, there you go.
and that makes me feel better.
Okay.
I can't get my chair to be the right distance.
It's hard. Oh, that's a good reminder.
And it's
I
tippy.
don't
I'm
want to
like,
do my heavy breathing. I'm going to just back this up. Okay.
okay. Just all different kinds of heavy breathing. Just one reel of just like
That's it.
congested heavy breathing,
Yeah.
like exhausted heavy breathing.
Yeah.
So many different.
Maybe
So
other
many
bodily noises like
flavors.
my stomach gurgling or
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
that sounds
clearing of
good.
sinuses.
Hmm.
That's a goodie.
I especially like your sound. That's a ah.
I've tried to cut back on my loud nose blowing because I think it might be damaging things.
Oh no.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Concerning, but it's so satisfying. It's like
It's-
so satisfying. Okay,
okay.
ready?
Yes.
Here we go.
Here we go.
And begin. So this month, on the podcast, we are considering birth. And I am going to tell a story about birth that I find intriguing. And about which I don't have like I've not drawn conclusions or I just have a feeling of uh wonder and interest. And here's the story. So I have a sister and she is 16 years younger than me and she lives in Mexico. And I found out I had a sister when I was 30 and I found my father's California family and by calling people who have his last name and like looking them up in the phone book and then just randomly calling them until someone was my family.
Wow.
It's like that book with the bird, like who goes around asking things
Oh
if
yeah, are you my mother?
yeah,
Are
that's all the Belmontes
you
in
my Mexican
California.
family? Wow. That
Yeah.
is perseverance. I don't think I knew that.
It wasn't that hard. It was like
It
an
wasn't?
afternoon. It was
Okay, so it
so
was kind of like came quickly enough. Okay. So you're like, actually, I
I was
recommend
like,
it.
what am I gonna do? There's no school.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was in massage school at the time. And so then I found them and they were very welcoming and I went to California and found out some more information about my a lot more information about that part of my family, including that I have a sister. Um and that was a moment my sister appeared in my reality and she just appeared as like a tiny spot of light, like not even a fully like I was so overwhelmed by information during that visit that
Mhm.
like it was like you have a sister. It was kind of like I put it on a post-it note like this is important, don't forget this.
Right.
But I didn't really open the door to it. Like it was like there is a light outside of this door.
Mhm.
I wrote like sister on a post-it note, put it on the door. I could see the light around the cracks, but she wasn't even really in. But that was the moment that so like if she was being like vaginally birthed, I would say that was like maybe that was like the like quarter on the top of her head. Like they were like, we see your head, like
Right.
like there really is a baby in there,
Yes.
um, but I was like, I can't, I have to like, and it took her, uh, I don't know, 17 years. Wait, no, I was 30, 40. Yeah, like 15, 16 years to be born into my life. After that moment when she was starting to crown, like there was a long time when I was like, okay, I can't do anything with that information. I know that I have a sister. I would email her, she would email me.
Right.
But I was like, I can barely like I was happy. I was super happy, you
Mm.
know? And even super happy, I was like, nope, I don't know. I can't, I don't
Mhm.
know that I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't have a crib. Like, I don't have any diapers.
Yeah, like,
Like, I don't have the things I need for
right.
this
Maybe
baby
she
to be
should
in my life.
stay in there crowning.
It's
Because, like, then I can be like, yep, she's there.
I don't want her to go away at
We don't need
all.
a diaper. She's
Exactly.
like,
Stay with that umbilical cord.
just
Just
pre-birth.
like no oxygen in your lungs. Just stay in there. I
Yeah.
can't. I can't, you know. That's my experience of my sister being born into my life.
Hmm.
My sister grew up with our father in her life, and their houses, she didn't grow up in his house with him. Their houses are across the street from each other. She grew up in her mother's house and like her mother's family's house. But in my father's house, our father's house, there were pictures of me like
Hmm.
that my mother had sent him from when I was little. And so
Hmm.
from as far back as she can remember, she knew that she had a sister
Hmm.
who was me. And she knew my face, like not this face obviously, but she had like a version of my
Yeah.
face in her life. I was born into my sister's life when she was born, and she thought about me.
Yeah.
Like when I was whatever
Hmm.
age I was when she was born, which at this moment I can't do that at all. Well, 16. When I was 16,
Yeah.
16 years younger than me. So when we were in high school,
Yeah.
there was a child in Mexico who knew about me,
Right.
and I was her sister.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were in Belmont,
Mm-hmm.
there was a creature that was beginning to form a worldview that I was in,
Mm-hmm.
and like
Mm.
it's been her whole life that I've been getting born into her world.
Mm.
And then we met each other for the first time like, and like it increased a lot. And then we met each other for the first time. It'll be a year in February.
Mm.
And it's like that, like I don't know which of the moments is the moment when it's like, but for sure at that point we were like,
Right. Like, here we are.
like,
The door is open. The
uh-huh,
baby's born.
baby's born. But I think I sort of, I don't know, I sort of feel full of marvel and wonder. Marvel isn't the right word. It's like, what's the word for something where you're like, what is it? Like,
Mm.
what is it to have someone who's incredibly important to
Mhm.
you and your story that is going to be born into your life in a way that's powerful,
Mm.
but isn't, or maybe used to be in your life in a way that's powerful.
Mhm.
Like there are all these sort of like partial birth periods,
Yeah.
or like partial, I don't know if
Partial
they're death,
loss or
like,
death.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm really, it's just makes me feel really interested in that, and like what's it like
Mhm.
to be, it's like not just like you get born out of a vagina and then you're born.
Mhm.
It's like there's a million phases inside of this one,
Oh, yeah.
and I thought maybe we could talk about that
Sure.
today, Sasha.
Because it's not, I think, when you've lived long enough and if you're not living in the same place with the same people your whole life, which some people do,
Mhm.
You and I haven't, and I think a lot of people move around or have complicated family narratives, or it's there are going to be people who are in and out of your life, but you don't know.
Mm.
You don't know what you don't know. Like, I don't
Mhm.
know if I'm missing something. Maybe there's someone right now for whom I am alive,
Mhm. Mhm.
and maybe I'll know about them at some point, maybe not.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah.
think about this with regard to like my high school boyfriend.
Mhm.
Um, in that he is like part of the mythology of my teenage years. And my kids know his name, and there's like a joke about like, oh, you're talking about Mark again, and like it's all like silly and fine. But I'm like, he lives in my kids' world. Like they're, like and I don't know if he talks about me in that way. I'm guessing not, but I don't know. Like I don't know if like I have a sweet, like tender feeling, and I was really grateful for that. It was a tender, sweet thing for me, and he was a part of that. And so he's a part of my little story that's really salient, especially
Mhm.
for having teenagers. Um, so he lives in my kids' world.
Amen.
Even though they'll
So
never meet,
sweet. And he
probably,
was
unless
born
there's
in
some
that.
fluky thing.
Mhm.
So, and he might not ever know. He
I
might not
mean,
ever
it's
know.
fascinating to me. It's
I
just
know.
fascinating to me. And does it what does it do? Does it do anything? Like, does it do anything to be in
I don't, I, it's the kind of thing that I think it does, but
I
I
do too.
don't know how. I don't understand it. But I do feel like, so on the flip side, you talk about, people being like, oh, they're hugely important, but they're not like they're in that like birth canal.
Yeah.
Or on the flip side, in, as I called it, death's waiting room,
Yeah.
and like we're just kind of, our relationship is now going to be, the next step is one of us dying.
Yeah.
And so for now, we're just, we're not in each other's lives. We are, we're estranged. I was estranged from my mom for 8 years. We had a few phone calls in the middle, when she was sober, that were really good. And I'm really glad we did. But she was hugely and remains hugely impactful in my life. Like she
Mhm.
is a huge part of why I'm doing this project.
Mhm.
She is like, I write about her. I think about her often.
Mhm.
She shaped like
Mhm.
how I started and continues to have an impact on me as I get older. And I'm like, oh, this was at when she was however old I am,
Yeah.
46, 47,
Yeah.
47. Like, right, I was 27, like,
Mm.
yes, like I remember her then.
Oh, yeah.
And things like that. And she's still going to be a part of me, and she's gone. She's been gone for 2 years. And that's another thing where she still kind of lives in me. But when during the estranged period, I remember being like, I can't, for a lot of reasons, be in touch with her. Sometimes I couldn't find her.
Mhm.
And sometimes it felt too dangerous to me. Like it would not be good for my health or my kids to try to engage with her. And but I remember just being like, I'm gonna just think about her. I'm like gonna hold her energetically and like send her,
Yeah.
like imagine sending her love and light. And it sounds kind of corny, but it felt so real, and it felt like it went. Like it felt like it went.
Yeah.
And some people might call it a prayer, and some people would have different names for it, but it feels like there are ways we are more accessible to it. It doesn't have to always be like I'm a part of your life because we talk and we work together and we see each other and we can, but there's other ways maybe we are part of each other's life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if it matters that we don't have descriptions for it, or that we don't have any more, or many people, because I guess prayer is, well, I guess prayer is a thing that continues to exist culturally, that does to some extent like address this
Mhm.
this feeling,
Mhm.
where you're like, okay, well, you're in my prayers, or like you're in my thoughts, and you
Mhm.
say that because it feels like it matters,
Right.
like I'll send you good energy, and it sounds trivial, but I don't think it's trivial. um and then I also think about like your mother also exists in your children's lives,
Mhm.
some version of her, but what version? Like, what does it also? So then I have so many questions about this. Like, doesn't
Mhm.
matter if it's doesn't matter if the version that exists is
Mhm.
accurate. What are the accuracies that matter? Doesn't matter if
Yeah.
you're getting sent like malevolent energy. If you
Mhm.
have been born
Right.
into someone's life in a way that is where you are a part of a painful narrative, and they are spending a lot of time um sort of engaging with you that way, like
Mhm.
sometimes I feel really buoyed and comforted and joyful about the idea that I exist in a lot of realities that I don't know about, and sometimes I feel
Like, ooh, how though? Can I fact check? Oh, just a quick read over what you're saying. Yeah.
and I
No.
don't I don't know that any I don't and then okay, so that's one thing I would like to talk about, and then the second thing I'd like to talk about, I'm offering two. I'm just gonna put two plates on the table now at this
Okay.
point. Because also it was true to some extent. So for my father, we knew that we existed. I always knew he existed, and then I met him. So I always knew he existed. So he was born into my life much in the same way I was
Mhm.
born into my sister's life, like through photographs from as early as I can remember. And my mother saying, "Oh, your father this and your father that,"
Mhm.
in a really lovely way. And then but in my mind, I made a person, or like I
Mm.
made an entity that was not my father. Like I made an entity out
Oh
of
yeah.
my father, out of father materials, that was
Out of
you know
father materials. Like go to the store and you're like, I'll have some legs. I'll have a work ethic that's like, pretty good. I love that you just father materials. Let's just stick it all
Yep.
together.
Like
Okay.
some of these, but the father materials the store I was shopping in was like the divinity store. It was like, which holy father would you like to construct? And I was like, I'm gonna make the best holy father, and I made an awesome holy father. Um,
Mm.
and it turns out my father,
Uh-uh.
no, his parts were, well, I don't know, but not at first glance, not at first glance.
No.
Um, and so that
Yeah.
was a really interesting. And then when he showed up in my world, he was there for a few days and he disappeared. Then I made another father in his absence then I adjusted, you know, and then I made another
To
father.
over adjust.
I Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I still don't really know the thought, the current. And I think that to some extent we're always doing this, right? Like I don't have you inside me. I mean, I do have you inside me, but you're inside me. So you're
Mm-hmm.
all
Yeah.
shaped.
Mm-hmm.
But when I met my father, and I had no idea if I existed inside of my father. Like I didn't know if he remembered me or thought about me
Right.
or didn't think about me. And I still don't for sure because of his, cognitive stuff, but I think I do for sure also,
Mhm.
because like when I met him, there's that like almost like it feels almost like feeding.
Mm.
It's like where you're like, you could, do you know what I mean? Where the person shows up and there's all of this energy that I've made inside of me that I'm like
Mhm.
humming with, that's imagined him, and then there
Mhm.
he is, and he has his humming energy, and when the two things come together, there's like a sudden, or for me in this
Mhm.
case, there was sort of like a, oh, and now the
Mhm.
pathways have met, and there's a
Mm.
bridge, and it's like back and forth, and I'm like, "Oh, I see it." And I could tell, or I thought I could tell, that the same thing was happening for him with me, where there was this like humming energy of his
Mm.
daughter he didn't have for whom he didn't have a grounding point,
Mhm.
and then there was a grounding point, and then the two things were, and
Mm.
so I think that's an interesting feeling. Okay, so
Mhm.
those
You
those are the
know,
plates I've offered you now, Sasha.
yes, now what? Well,
Little
as
this,
you
little that. I don't feel
first
like
of
they go
all,
together that
if
well.
we ever show the video in some way of this episode, what you were just doing with the light behind your hands, like showing the waving and the weaving and the vibration was like awesome. It was so awesome. I'm just gonna say. Um, that's my first plate. My
Dear
second
listening
plate,
audience, you'll
yes.
never
You will
understand
never understand.
what
It
we're
was
talking about
fantastic.
this
Um,
segment. So,
so the yeah, it's so I used to say that my mom and I had good chemistry,
mm,
and that's what made me think of what you were saying. Like when she and I would be together, like whatever was going on with me and whatever was going on with her was kind of like the
uh-huh,
problem was I would lose myself in it.
uh-huh,
And then her whatever was very powerful and self-destructive.
uh-huh.
And I was like, well, I'm now in self-destructing mode. Like, what is happening? And
Uh-huh. That's interesting too to
yeah,
think about. That's super interesting.
I yeah, so but as you talk about the humming, I think with different kinds of kin, it can feel that way in different ways. Like I have that with my dad and like that side of the family and then also like with my sister, obviously we're really close in a lot of ways. But so I think that's why it's more notable like when I'm like with my brothers.
Uh-huh.
They're both half brothers from my dad and my sister's a half sister from my mom. But my brothers, like I don't see them as often. I didn't grow up as much with them. Not that I did. I was 12 and 16 years older than all of them. But I'm like, oh, there's something about us.
Mm-hmm.
Like I
Mm-hmm.
have my one of my brothers, he and I think physically or whatever, like our matter, our DNA is similar. Even though we
Mm-hmm.
live kind of quite different lives, like the way there's little things, there's things you can note, like we both grind our teeth at night. We
Mm.
both like there's certain things that we do that we're like, oh, I see
That's neat.
I see this. Like we were doing a same similar dance because that's what our bodies want to do, and that's what our code is having us to. And you feel familiar, even if I don't really like. We're still unpacking a
Yeah.
lot of distance. Um, but anyway. Um,
And then I think like, what is the thing that makes like everyone, okay, so now I don't know about this episode. I'm feeling worried that it's not going to have a through line, but I'm going to not worry. I'm just going to keep going because the next thought I have is, well, one thought I had when you were talking was, is it everybody? Like, because then sometimes I meet people for the first time, and I'm quickly like, okay, I know that like I can feel their vibration. I can find where the vibration that's them sits in me, like
mhm,
it's like, oh, you're lighting up a thing that is already here, like, oh, it's us again. Oh, it's us
mhm,
again. Even though it's not again,
mhm,
like to some extent I felt that with my cousin Josue, who lives here in Portland, and we met for the first time last summer, and I
mhm,
was like, oh, it's us again. It's us again. I
mhm,
felt that way with and but I've also felt that way with unrelated people, like
Mhm.
where I
And
like sit down with them on a bench and I like Hannah, I felt that way the first time I met her. I was like, Jan, I felt that way the first time I
mhm.
met her. Like, oh, it's us again. It's us
Mm,
again. Oh good. Oh good, it's us again.
I
Um,
like that.
yeah. And
It feels like something that's new, but not. It's a return. It's like something that it's almost like a future self is like, yeah, this is the
uh-huh.
thing.
Yeah.
This is the feeling that you're going to be used to,
Hmm.
that you um
Like you were already born in here and now you're relit.
mhm,
And
yeah.
and now you're relit and you get to be lit
Mhm.
in this way, which is nice.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I don't
I
know.
don't know.
Neither do I, Sasha. I
I I think also, it's been interesting coming back to a place. I lived here for 6 years, about 10 years ago.
uh-huh.
So now we're back and we're seeing some of the same people we saw 10 years ago and 12 and 14 years ago. And it's great, but it's also, it's just notable, like how you slide back in, but you
Mhm,
don't. Like you're like, oh, we are obviously changed people, all of us, because it's been
mhm,
a decade. We have different things going on. But then there's also this familiarity. And I think though that can happen. And there's people like, I don't know. I don't know if it has to do with some sort of chemistry that you do or don't have with certain
yeah,
people. And sometimes you just, it's that whole thing, which we've all experienced, right? Where you're like, oh, I have some friends. I can just not talk forever. And then we pick up the phone and it's just like,
yeah,
immediately we're like, oh yeah, well, here's what's going on for me and da 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 da. And it's like you didn't lose any time.
yeah,
And that is, I'm so grateful when I have that.
yeah,
Because sometimes you have to work at it. You can be like, who are you now? How are you? Like,
uh-huh.
what am I picking up? Like, it's like the dance is harder. It's like, you've
Yep,
changed. You're now doing this. And I'm like trying to
yep,
connect with you. So I think it's about like, I don't know if there is a through line here. I feel like it's about birth within, but also about the connection. Because, like, with your birth story, your original one about like your sister being in the, you know, metaphorical like birth canal
mhm,
and you being like, I'm aware, but
mhm,
I'm not sure what I'm doing with it. So you can stay there. And
mhm.
then later, out she came, and then you are like, but it's also about like connection. And there's
Right.
like, you can sometimes hold the intention. Like I am put, like you said, putting a sticky note on the door that says sister, important.
Mhm,
Like, and yet not be like, all right, I'm pulling this baby out. Here we go. And I think that that's also interesting. It felt like that with my mom, but
yeah,
in the opposite of like, you're really important to me and I can't be right here with you. And
yeah.
so you're coming over here and I'm going to label like precious and dangerous.
Uh-huh.
And we're going to like have a little arm's length kind of distance, but
It's
I don't
really
know.
interesting because even when, because like, because you're right. Once I can see what you mean about your mother, like when if you were like, yes, I will birth you into my life, everything that you said, like your energies, it's like you guys vibrated together really powerfully.
Mhm.
Um, but it was her for whatever combination of reasons, her sound, it's like, was the sound that you guys tuned to, like
Yeah.
her music was a sound you danced to when you were together. And so it was like to some extent, it was like you were born into her it was less deciding to allow her to be born into your reality and
Mhm.
more like if you allowed her to be born into your reality, it meant she would appear in your reality and then immediately you would get born back into her reality and live in that
Oh,
space.
And that's the reality kind of warping experience of being with my mom, is it was always like her version of me was the one that was dominant.
Mhm.
And so that was hard for me, and I to find myself and be more clear about who I am
Mhm.
when I have been bathed in this other idea of who I am. I've been told, I've been shown who I am, and it's not meshing. I started feeling sick. Like I
Mhm.
at one point saw her and then broke out in hives. Like
Mhm.
I was like, my body was like, okay, you cannot seem to understand that this is not good for you. So I'm gonna freak out.
Mhm.
So it started freaking out. Like my body was like helpful because I was so stubbornly like, no, I'm gonna keep doing stuff. And then it's like my body's like slowly breaking down. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I literally can't because I'm at the ER.
Yeah.
So because like I
I
had
can't come
like my
over.
throat was starting to like get tight and hot. And I was like, okay,
Mhm.
no. And
Yeah.
that was hard. And I knew you talk about people talking about you. That was very hard for the period of my mom. I think the last few years I don't think she was doing this. I think she was, for a lot of reasons, was not engaging in this, trash talking her daughters. But there was a period where she would trash talk us all the time.
Mm.
And we would have this person she did this to then call us
Mm.
and say like, why are you so terrible, like, and basically tell me what obviously they had just been told again and again. And it was great. It was fun. I recommend like getting called by random people, or like people you heard of when you were a kid, like your mom's like high school friend that now she's living with for a while because she's homeless, and you're like, I never thought I'd hear about this person again, but now why is she on the phone yelling at me? Um,
Yeah.
and
So
I
interesting.
was born into their world as like such a different person than I feel like I am, and that
Mhm.
most people would corroborate and say, yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know what version that is. But who's to say what's real? Like, I don't
Mm.
know. In some version of reality, and in some way, if you squint, like,
Mhm.
mm-hmm, I did
Right.
say I can't see you
Right.
right
Right.
now.
And you think
And
about how
yeah,
real that
yeah.
version, I mean, that version, you can see how real that version
Mm-hmm.
was for her.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about like how we can or can't drag our realities with us into engagement with other people. Like as incarnate humans, we live in specific realities. And then this whole, to me, to some extent, it feels like this whole project, it's like, how can I like overlay, how close can we get given that we're sort of wrapped in this bubble of our particular reality? Um, and my and in a dream world and worlds that feel really good, we're quite close, but where our realities are able to like
Mm-hmm.
play and mingle, but then separate out again and not be, um, and that seems like an interesting project. I don't think that's everyone's project. I don't think that's everybody's ideal world. I think that
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of people who are like, in an ideal world, we come together, we form like a two-person reality, and then we travel down that stream.
Mm-hmm.
Or we come together and you suck into my reality
Mm-hmm.
and we travel down that stream.
Yeah.
Um, it's like, what kind of birth are you what birth into the potential communal reality? That feels easier. Like you're a fetus and you develop lungs and you get pushed out into the air and then you're available for consumption, or like you're like available for rebirth,
Mm-hmm.
now you're like an entity that's available for birth into all the different human realities.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've become material
Mm-hmm.
that you've
Mm-hmm.
transferred into this different state.
Yeah.
But then it to some extent it feels to me like once you are born, like physiologically as we define it, that's just the beginning. And then you are part of this project of like birth and death into and out of all the realities that exist inside this dimension, you know?
Mhm.
And that is like happening. You're just like, it's just canals. It's just like
Just constant. Right. Right. Yeah.
and death too, I think. You know, like
Hmm. And the thing with death, it's kind of like with birth, you know, like you said, oh my gosh, like now that I know, when I was 16, there was this person being born into a
mhm,
world that included me. And I didn't know about her for 14 years or something, right? Um, I think similarly with loss and death, you never, well, you don't never know, but a lot of times, and you don't know when you last will see someone.
yeah,
You don't know when you last will, like, oh, that was the last phone call.
yeah.
I remember when I talked to my mom during one of those good times, and it was like a random day. She was in a rehab or a halfway house after rehab, and she was like coherent, and we were able to talk, and we talked had conversations for like off and on for a week. And I remember, for whatever reason, I remember thinking, I'm going to set aside time for this. Like, I'm not sure what's happening. And I'm also not trying to do anything. I'm not like, what is your plan next? What do you need? Blah, 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 blah. Like, I just didn't get involved in the details like I had in the past or tried to, as if that would help. Because as we've talked,
Mhm.
me trying to
Mhm.
control things is not always the answer. And
No.
often actually not, even though that's my first impulse. It's like, I know, let me take over. And it's like, anyway, so I just was with her. And we talked
Mhm.
about whatever was happening that day, or how she was feeling that day, or what I was up to that day. And I remember in that moment having this almost otherworldly feeling of like, I think this is it.
Oh, wow.
And that kind of like it was years ago, like, I don't know, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, like quite a while before she died. And and but I felt this like, it's like the opposite of the whole baby in the birth canal. It's like you see the head crowning, but you see it's like going, and you're like, I'm glad I stopped and it was here to be with this for this moment and not try to make it something it isn't. Um, and it was like a total of like 3 hours out of my life that week or whatever. And I'm really grateful.
Mhm.
And I don't know.
Yeah,
But a lot of times you don't know. Like you don't.
right.
I have other people who are like, I can't remember when the last time they saw my mom was, or what it was like, or because it's just some random moment.
Yeah.
It's some random moment or some email that you thought that you'd reply to and then didn't. And then it's like, oh, that
Mhm.
was it. That was it.
That was it. And then and then and then there's a part. Wait. Right. And then her life continued on here
Mm-hmm.
after that moment, but you don't know what all
Mm-mm.
those moments were, and
Mm-mm.
you don't know. There's like that period that where you don't know, and then she died, and now she's dead, and you
Mhm.
still have her.
I
And in
still,
some ways the connection to her is the same.
yeah, I mean, in my day to day life and in my heart, I feel I don't occasionally do Google searches anymore to see if she died and I didn't know, which is something sad that I would do sometimes. But there's like a piece with like, okay, I know exactly
Yeah.
what happened, or where she is now in a box in my closet. But and I do want a different thing for her at some point. We'll get there. Anyway, that's another story. Um, but but in terms of the stories I tell, the way I bring her to life in my kids' lives, you know, um, saying she's in a box in my closet though can be really off-putting. Like if like that's kind of like
I
a
know
horror
where she
movie.
is
Like
now.
she's under the floor,
In a box.
she's in a box.
In a
I
closet.
mean, yes, gosh.
Yeah.
But
Right. But
I
yeah.
don't know. But like she's still very much alive in me and very
Mhm.
much alive in us. And I'm doing this work that I think I'm not alone in this generation of folks trying to undo and
Yes.
trying to see where we are midstream. Like
Mhm.
you're like being bumped along. You're like, what the hell rapid is this? Like I am being tossed and now I have kids and I'm tossing them too. And then I'm like, look, I can stand up for a second and be like, oh, I see what my mom was doing. Like I see
Mhm.
she was trying to stay afloat. And if you look back, like how she was raised and a lot of pressure gets put on the matrilineal line. Like
Mhm.
so much pressure. And we don't often talk about like, and then my dad's dad, like unless something really dramatic. It's like this the mothers are the reason.
Mhm.
And it just and it's a little self-serving for me to come in defense of mothers, but I'm also defending my mother,
Right.
who I do think tried her best.
Yeah.
Really, really did.
Yeah. And she was born and swimming in her reality
Yeah.
that was not her. That was, to some extent was just what she was, what she was swimming in, like what she was born into.
Totally.
Yeah, it's the holding is interesting. Like the material holding is complicated enough, like the material arrival and departure and then the ways we interact with each other materially, like during this period of whatever
Mhm.
manifestation. But it feels to me like maybe 12% of the total project. And so much of the project is immaterial.
Mhm.
And that part for obvious reasons, we have um modern humans are like, no, 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 that part's silly. We're not
Mhm.
going to contemplate that part. We're not going to talk about that part. If you try to talk about that part, we're going to be like, oh, woo woo,
I know.
like get down to business, do the practical work. And it feels like I I'm I think that it maybe is the practical, or I don't know, practical. I'm not sure that I care about whatever. That to me feels like the salient work, or the
Mhm.
work is even the wrong word. That feels like the
It's all wrong. All the words are wrong.
but that feels to me like where it is. Like I want to wonder and ponder and not understand what that whole thing was. Like when your
Yeah.
mother had a body and then you were with her, and how that body was connected to all of the other bodies, like energetic bodies, and how when you swim in her, you swim in all of them. And when she swims in them, she brings you with
Mhm.
her. And now that she's gone, I would, I suspect that the same thing is happening in some way,
Mhm.
possibly.
Mhm.
Um, and it's harder to talk about because of how, well, because we don't,
Yeah.
and then B, because we don't have all of our, because it doesn't fit the narrative that we have, the constructed narrative that we have. But I
Well,
like
I know.
talking. I
It
prefer, yeah.
Yeah. I think that the narrative, I mean, so much of it is it's about the physical manifestation of things. And then there's supposed to be a discrete timeline for how then you process it, and how when it's disordered, you know, oh, it's gone on more than a year, then you have a disorder
Yeah.
with grief. And
Yeah.
it's like, what? Um, what is this? You know, it's not linear. It's not, there's no particular timetable. I think I was grieving my mom before she was dead, and sadly kind of hoping for that moment, like um for closure, and for, because I knew she was kind of reeling and suffering, and it's like complicated and not easy to talk about, and not discreet. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like she was difficult and hard and magnetic and fiery and lovely, and she was all these things. And I think, if you, like we talked about at one point, the different versions of a story I would tell, you know, and I think all of those have lived in different times inside of me, and I've probably told the stories to people
Mhm.
in
I
different
love
ways. But now I feel
like
like they're all kind of here as I
it's
get
like
older. It's like a complicated aura.
I like that they don't die, like they get born and then they
Yeah.
like that first father
Mm-hmm.
is born, and then the second Holy
Yeah.
Father is born, and then the third, like,
Yeah.
broken father is born, and then it's like
Yeah.
just more and more and
Like
more,
yeah, an amalgamation, like a uh and
like
then
a
somehow they
circus, some kind of
yeah,
like
some sort
big
of like
circus,
spirit, like,
spirit circus.
I like it.
You're just opening the doors and there are
Like,
more
hey,
acrobats, more and more.
yes.
Complexities.
Well, one of the ones that I picture my mom as is her like 1983 like workout outfit, like with the Jane Fonda, like the high cut leotard and like the leg warmers. And she would, like, you know, and so that was, so that's a part of it. She could be
Yeah.
doing her stuff, and it was, yeah, it's good stuff. Well, this has been like, I don't know. I feel like sometimes a through line is overrated.
I feel like it's
So that's my take
that's why we're
on
friends.
that's why we're
Because
friends. Who needs a through line? But I do think it's kind of like a jumping off point into who the hell knows. And so the jumping off point was coming alive or dying inside someone's reality. And like, I
Mhm.
feel like this is a hard thing to talk about, because like you said, there isn't like a, and here is my thesis.
I know.
Like,
Like what to expect when you're coming alive inside someone's reality, like a book that has
yeah,
like at 2 months, you know,
exactly. I have no idea, but it's,
you will be opening your eyes
you
inside of
know,
someone's reality.
and I just think it's helpful as a thought exercise to ponder things like
Hmm.
what that is to come alive inside someone's reality, because you might take it for granted. And so I enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it, and I'm really grateful that you're willing to just jump off the edges of things with me.
Good.
I'm
It's
really
like Thelma
grateful.
and Louise jumping to our death. Excellent.
But we're willing. Okay, well, yeah, and I'm really glad that you came alive inside my reality and that I like,
Hello.
uh-oh.
Hello,
Now you've
hello.
come unalive. It's